the Tree and the Monk. In a remote monastery in the mountains, there lived a young monk named Kenji. Eager to attain enlightenment, he spent entire days meditating under the guidance of Master Haru. However, he felt that spiritual awakening eluded him, and his frustration grew with each passing day. One day, Kenji approached his master and said, "Master, I practice without rest, follow every teaching, and meditate diligently. But enlightenment does not come. What more must I do?" Master Haru smiled and, instead of answering, took Kenji to a garden behind the monastery. There, a fragile green shoot emerged from the ground. "Look at this young tree, Kenji. I planted it only a few months ago. Every day I water it, and every day it receives sunlight. However, I do not rush its growth. I simply trust that, with time, it will become a majestic tree." Kenji observed the small plant in silence. The master continued, "Just as a seed does not become a tree overnight, enlightenment does not come when one demands it. Everything has its time. You cannot pull its leaves to make it grow faster, nor force its trunk to widen. You must nourish it and trust the process." The young monk nodded slowly. For the first time, he understood that his impatience was a greater obstacle than any other. From that day forward, he continued his practice without anxiety, trusting that, like the tree, his awakening would come at the right time. Years passed, and one day, while contemplating the tree that now provided shade to the monastery, Kenji realized that enlightenment had blossomed within him without him even noticing. And then he smiled with the serenity of one who has learned to wait. Kenji's childhood. Kenji grew up in a village surrounded by rice fields and dense forests. From a young age, he displayed an insatiable curiosity and spent hours watching the flow of water in the streams or the dance of leaves with the wind. His grandfather, a wise and patient man, would tell him stories of ancient monks who attained enlightenment after years of searching. However, life in the village was not free of suffering. A great drought affected the crops, and many families had to leave in search of more fertile land. Kenji lost his mother during this time, and sadness clouded his heart. It was through this pain that his desire to find answers arose, to understand the purpose of suffering and the impermanence of life. The path to the monastery. At 14, Kenji decided to leave his home and embark on a journey to a monastery in the eastern mountains. The journey was arduous. He crossed rivers, traversed forests, and endured cold nights under the starry sky. Along the way, he met travelers, merchants, and hermits, each with their own stories and teachings. Finally, after weeks of travel, he arrived at the monastery, where he was accepted as an apprentice. There, he met Master Haru, who from the very first day taught him that patience was an essential virtue on the spiritual path. Master Haru and his teachings. Master Haru was an elderly man with a long white beard that gave him an air of ancient wisdom. His words were few, but each one carried the weight of years and experience. He taught his disciples through stories, silences, and daily tasks such as cultivating the garden, collecting water from the river, and cleaning the monastery halls. Kenji, eager to learn everything immediately, often grew frustrated by the apparent slowness of the teachings. "Enlightenment is like the sunrise," Haru told him once. "You cannot rush it. You can only be present to receive it when it comes." The years of trial. As the years passed, Kenji faced various trials. Some monks abandoned the path, unable to endure the monastic discipline. Others found answers in the daily routine, in the simplicity of manual work, and in the contemplation of the present moment. Kenji oscillated between despair and peace, but over time, he learned to accept uncertainty. One of the hardest trials came when an especially harsh winter struck the monastery. Food became scarce and some monks fell ill. Kenji, along with other apprentices, had to venture into the forest to gather firewood and edible roots. During those cold, hungry days, he realized that life in the monastery was not an escape from the world, but a deeper immersion into its reality. The search for answers. During a year-long silent retreat, Kenji learned to listen to the whisper of the wind, the crackling of the wood as it burned, and the sound of his own breath. He understood that wisdom was not found in grand revelations, but in the simplicity of the present moment. He met an old traveler who had spent decades wandering distant lands. The traveler spoke to him about the importance of patience, of how the river does not rush to reach the sea, yet always does. Inspired by his words, Kenji decided to embark on a pilgrimage. The journey and the return. For years, Kenji journeyed through valleys, deserts, and temples. He learned from other masters, faced his own ego, and realized that enlightenment was not a destination but a path. Finally, he returned to the monastery and found Master Haru older, but with the same serene demeanor. "Now you understand, Kenji," Haru said with a smile. "Nothing can be rushed. Everything comes in its due time." Kenji sat beneath the tree that had once been a fragile shoot. He closed his eyes and felt eternity in every breath. He had arrived at where he had always been, the present. Final reflections. Kenji spent the rest of his days teaching new disciples. He shared his story with those young, impatient ones, passing on the wisdom of time. He understood that enlightenment was not an achievement, but a way of living each moment with attention and gratitude. And so, under the shadow of the tree that had grown with him, he found an unchanging peace that accompanied him until the end of his days. The disciples of the monastery remembered his words, and over time, passed on his teachings to new generations. Thus, the story of Kenji and his tree continued to grow as a legacy of patience and understanding in the minds and hearts of all those who sought the truth.